All very confusing. Jenny Hallam. All right, this is on AustralianSeedBank.com. Jenny Hallam, last September, she's the activist who defied threat of criminal charges over CBD oil. Straight up, no weed, no THC. In a year, people should be celebrating medical cannabis legislation in Australia, and yet activists defy the threat of criminal charges. Earlier in 2017, police raided the home of oil producer Jenny Hallam in South Australia, shutting down her medical oil production, which sucks. But she's been helping people for free in Adelaide, South Australia. So
Hello.
there she is on the line right now. Jenny Hallam is on the line from Australia. Jenny, welcome to, I guess, really early tomorrow morning. It's still yesterday afternoon for us. How are you?
I'm very well, thank you. Thank you for having me.
Oh, I'm very glad to have you on. I'm coming at this from the good end of things. I'm not trying to get you in any kind of legal trouble, but you do have one hell of a ridiculous story to share with the rest of the world in this time of legalization of cannabis, in this time of medical breakthroughs, helping people put cancer and other disastrous illnesses behind them. We've had Vera Toomey on the show from Ireland a few weeks ago telling us about all of her tribulations. I want the world to know who you are. Jenny Hallam, you are a cannabis activist, and you come at this from a place where once upon a time you never had it or used it. So if you could tell us a little bit about how you got involved with this substance and before you got into trouble, because it's so simple and yet so complicated as to why you got into trouble. So let's start with that.
Okay. Just like most people, I'd used it when I was younger, just recreationally, and so I knew that it wasn't anything bad. But because of different issues, I sort of gave up all drugs, and so I actually had a car accident when I was 20 myself, and I've had a few different ones since then. None of them my fault. I'm not a bad driver. Unfortunately, I'm just have very bad luck when it comes to the road. So I've been left with a body-wide pain condition that leaves me with about a 6 out of 10 pain level. So for the first 15 odd years, the doctors had me on morphine and endone, oxycodone, those sort of things, shots of pethidine, and the really horrible drugs, and they weren't working. It wasn't really doing a lot for the pain, but it was making me really sick, and I got down to about 38 kilos, so that's basically like a child's weight, and I was going to die. My doctor said to me, there's not much we can do anymore to keep the weight on. He just didn't know what to do anymore. And so some friends had come over to visit, and they'd bought some weed with them, and they were just having a smoke, and they sort of said to me, look, just try some, just have a go and try some. It'll make you feel a bit better. So I had some, and for the first time in about 2 years, I ate a full meal that night. I didn't have any sort of appetite before that, and I was always feeling nauseous and just didn't really feel like eating. But that night, I straight away ate a full meal, and then I slept the full night through, and I hadn't done that for years.
Right.
And I was just amazed. I just couldn't believe it. So the next day I had some more, and then the next day I felt better again. So I thought, well, that's it. I'm just going to keep using it. So, even though it was illegal, and I knew I could get in trouble for it, it was worth it because I was going to die the way I had been, and this literally was saving my life. So I had been told by the doctors and the pain clinic that I wouldn't have children, that I would be in pain for the rest of my life, and that I wouldn't work anymore. I'd never work again. And I managed to prove them wrong, and I got a job as a waitress, and that's a pretty hard job if anyone knows what it's like to waitress.
Sure.
So I got back to waitressing, and then I got my own business, and just started getting better and better, and that was just from smoking it. And I was just amazed from that.
Are you
That was
serious?
just from
I
smoking.
did not know that. You were just smoking it, and you were getting this much
That
of an
was
improvement.
that was just from
Wow.
smoking it. Smoking it saved my life. And that's why I keep sort of saying to people, if that's the only way you can get it into you, then do it. Anyway, so then I heard about a guy, his name's called Tony Bauer, and he was the first person making oil here in Australia. And he was doing it mainly for kids with epilepsy. So I contacted him and asked if he would be able to help me. And he sort of explained that he couldn't. And now I understand why. Now that I'm sort of in the same position, I sort of totally understand. But I sort of said, okay, no worries. And so I went away, and it took me another 5 years before I sort of found groups that were sort of talking about making the oil themselves. And, these were online Facebook groups. So I had before I even started making the oil, I had started to try and get it legalized, and I had started working with or trying to work with some of the politicians. But our health minister here in the state that I live in was refusing to speak to anybody in regards to medicinal cannabis, and was just putting us off to the substance abuse minister,
Did they give
and
a
we were
reason
refusing to.
why? Did they say why they didn't
No,
want to talk to you?
no, no,
No.
they just put us off to the they just said that they wouldn't discuss it as a health issue, that we needed to discuss it with the substance abuse, minister, and I refused to discuss it with her because she didn't agree with cannabis. She thought it was as bad as cocaine and the other drugs,
Oh,
and didn't think people should be using it medicinally. So I thought there's no point speaking to her, and I didn't wanna speak to them anyway. I wanted to speak to the health minister. It was a health issue. So anyway, so I got very frustrated, and in the meantime, I'd learnt actually from a friend of mine from Canada that you guys over there were making a cannabis infused coconut oil,
right.
and so that was the first one I started to make, and I changed the recipe around a little bit, and made it a little bit better, and started off with that one, and that's the one I started using for myself at first, and within 5 months I was off all of my pharmaceutical medications. So during the time that I was smoking it, I was still using the morphines and those sort of things, but I think it was more of a crutch because in my mind they had been the only thing that had worked, and I was still a little bit scared of going off that. So, but once I got the oil and I realised how much better that was, they just fell away. And so, like I said, within 5 months, I was off all pharmaceutical medications, and that was including antidepressants, all the opiates, everything, absolutely everything. And I was better than I had ever been, and everyone had noticed. So my family had noticed, my friends had noticed, and they were all saying to me, "What are you doing? What are you doing?" So I said, "I'm using cannabis oil," and they were all a bit straight, surprised, and
Yeah.
because it was strange at the time, it wasn't really a normal thing. So then a few people that were like a few friends and family that were ill themselves said, "Well, look, can I try some? Have you got enough?" And I said, "Yeah, I've got heaps of it." It was to the point where making it just for myself, I had so much that I was getting to the point I was actually throwing it away because the coconut oil only
Oh.
lasts 3 months.
Oh,
Yeah,
that
so the
hurts
coconut
my
oil,
feelings.
yeah, well, I wouldn't. Well, actually, I wouldn't throw it away, but I couldn't use it for
No.
humans orally. So that's when I started giving it to animals, and started using it on animals and using it as just a rub on and those sort of things. But I couldn't use it orally anymore. So I would have to make a new batch for myself orally. So I did end up with quite a bit of it. So I started helping people's dogs and animals, and then I started helping other family members and friends, and then they got better, and so their friends and family members would ask and say, "What are you doing?" And so it sort of started to get around just word of mouth to start off with. And so at the time of my raid, when the police came to raid me, I was helping probably about 200 people.
Just before we
And
get to the
that had,
raids, let's hear a little bit about what kind of conditions you were treating dogs with and friends and family. Was it all cancer, or what kinds of things were you finding it to be effective with?
It was absolutely everything, almost every condition that I mean, there wasn't many that I hadn't treated. So one of the best ones that it was working for was the epilepsies. This was at the time, this was just the coconut oil I'd started with. So we found with the cannabis infused coconut oil, it was reducing the swelling on the brain. So it was not only stopping the seizures. So these kids were having the 100 seizures a day, down
Oh,
to nothing. But it was also waking them up. So the damage that the previous seizures and the other medications had done, it was fixing that. So it was reducing the swelling on the brain, and these children were actually waking up. So these kids were non-verbal before and were basically just vegetables. They would sit there with their tongue hanging out, drooling, and they would not communicate. Would not be able to communicate with their families. And they actually changed, and they went to the point where they were making eye contact, and then they started tracking with their eyes, and then they started verbalizing, just grunts and things like that. And then it got to the point where these kids were speaking, and then they were waking up. And this is when it has started happening with like lots and lots of different children. That's when I realised there's something here. It's not just a fluke. There is something about this oil that is good.
right. And you're
Um,
using it on
and so
kangaroos as well. Sorry for my non-Australian interest in the roos, but you
yeah.
actually had kangaroos that were not doing well, and you reversed that with some applications of the oil.
Yeah, well, I had one kangaroo that had broken its tail, and you have to be very careful with the medications that you give animals because they can get very sick from it. So, the medications that you give kangaroos can actually kill them if you give them just a slight. like just slightly more than what they're supposed to have, and a lot of them are sort of are very funny with them. So rubbing the oil onto the tail of the kangaroo took the pain away, without having to use anything orally or or any of the other medications that were going to hurt it. So that's one of the great things. With dogs, we were actually using it. Orally as well. We had dogs with cancer and dogs with epilepsy and those sort of things. So we were using it sublingually with the dogs, and we were having fantastic results with those. And we actually managed to save quite a few runts. I knew a few different breeders, and it started off with just one breeder who had a runt, and it wasn't feeding, and it'd been sort of pushed away by the others, and it was just sort of curled up in a corner. It was getting colder and weaker, and there was nothing they could do, and it was getting to the point where it just looked like it was going to die. So a friend of mine sort of said, "Look, is there anything I can do just to make it more comfortable?" So we just put a little tiny dab of the coconut oil in its mouth,
Yeah.
and just sort of wrapped it up nice and warm, and just sort of we knew that there probably wasn't much more we could do, and so we went away, and an hour later she actually, because she'd been up all night, she'd actually dozed off and fallen asleep, and then about an hour or so later she rang me back and was like really excited and said, "You won't believe this." I said, "What's wrong?" She said, "I woke up," and she said, "I couldn't find the puppy anywhere," and she said, "I thought maybe the mother had taken it and dumped it away from all the others," and she said, "But no, then I realised it was up. It had pushed all the others away and was on the best heat
Oh
and was
man,
drinking."
that's amazing.
And she said,
That's amazing.
and that one ended up being the strongest and the smartest out of the whole litter. So then we ended up doing that with the runts of all litters of the different people that I knew, and we had that result with every other runt. They just ended up being stronger and smarter than the rest.
Well, let me ask you this on that note, and we'll get to the raids and the police and everything. But there are a lot of
Mhm,
people. I haven't really explored the medical aspect with animals, but of course they're biological units, so why wouldn't it work? But here's my
mhm,
concern: when a man, in my case, 170, 180 pound man, and at the time I was a lot lighter when I started using. I was probably about 145, 150, but that's a lot of weight, and even with that weight, body mass. I'm taking a tiny initial amount of a pinhead, like I said, to slowly acclimatize. So, how did you break down being able to figure out a dosage for an animal? It must be infinitely tinier, the initial dosage, because if you give them too much, they'll just pass out and flop around, and you think they're sick, but they're just
yeah,
really, really high. So, how did you gear
they're
it
just
down?
stoned.
So,
Yeah.
how did you do that? Well, what kind of?
Well, that's it. You just well, with the because I now make the two different types. I make the full extract oil, and I also make the coconut oil. So what we would do, we would start off with the coconut oil because that wasn't as strong, but we would start off with, like you said, just minute doses, just like one drop. Like one drop, and say a human would start off with maybe 10 drops. So it was sort of basically a tenth of what we would give humans.
Okay,
But it would also go by body weight. So I would go by body weight. So a dog that was, just a little chihuahua size, would only get, let's say one drop, and maybe, a dog the size of a Great Dane might get, three drops. So,
right.
you just sort of you have to sort of go by the size of the animal as well. So, but yeah, that's what basically how we had to do it. We just, started off just the tiniest amount, the smallest amount that you could get in, and diluting it down as well. You start off by diluting it down as much as possible. With the coconut oil, I would dilute it down with more just plain coconut oil, or with the FECO, the full extract oil, I would dilute that down with olive oil, so that we were getting, just a diluted amount. And then as we were bringing their tolerance levels up, we would then, take away that dilution, and so that you were only just sort of getting the actual oil itself. So, yeah, so it's just a matter of just being very careful and
Right.
just finding ways to break it down. So,
Well, if you were going to give, if someone here listening is going to try using this on their animal for all kinds of different reasons, their dog or their cat or what have you, what would you
mhm.
recommend at this point? What would you say to the person who winds up getting a dog that looks like it's going to die and is just like completely falling over and dizzy, and you think, oh my God, he's overdosing, and you get nervous about it? What's the best thing to do in that situation? Or did you not ever get to that? Were you always careful enough that never happened?
Well, no, occasionally you did. Occasionally, especially at the very beginning, you gave them too much, and they would get stoned. And I had a little Chihuahua. As a puppy, he was already terribly injured. He was abused as a puppy, so he'd already had broken legs and broken tails. So he
Oh,
had a lot of pain conditions. So and the vets couldn't, because he had it from a puppy. The vets couldn't give him the pain medications that they had, because it just would have killed him after a few years. So
yeah,
wasn't a lot they could really do for him. So at the start, there were a couple of times when I did give him a little bit too much, unfortunately. But all that happened was he just sort of like looked at me as if to say, like, what's happening, and then just curled up in a ball on the couch and just went to sleep, and just slept for a little bit. And so when he needed to go to the toilet, he was a little bit wonky, so we would just sort of just guide him, and but he was okay. And like I said, and we learned very quickly that what is too much, and that was when we realised, okay, we really need to dilute it right down, and
yeah.
and do it that way. So so he probably was my guinea pig in a little bit, but he, considering the amount of pain he was in, I don't think he ever minded, because he always came back. Like, he knew when I was getting the oil out. So, and this is
Right.
funny. This is, a lot of people tell me this is, both with the kids that are nonverbal, do this as well, but also the animals tend to do this. Is they know when you're getting it out. They see when you're getting out the bottle of it, or wherever you're getting it from,
Right.
and they know what it is. It's not long before they associate that is what makes them feel better, and so they stand there and wait for it. And so Max would stand there with his tail wagging,
Well, I know I
when
do.
I got it out of.
That's that's for
Yeah,
sure.
I know I do. My tail would wag too if I had
Yeah.
one. So so they know it's making them feel better. So he would come back and want more of it, and you could tell when it had worn off and he wasn't feeling very good, and you could see that the pain was affecting him, and so to me that was worth it. Just a couple of times of getting him a little bit too stoned was worth the 2 years or whatever it was that he had of no pain. That was definitely, because he changed. He went from a dog that looked like he just didn't want to be around anymore to a dog that was running around like a puppy again. And
Oh,
I mean like a puppy. He was I mean, this was a 15-year-old dog that
oh,
was
wow.
screaming around the house like a puppy. And I took him to a vet at one point when he was 16, and they did all the normal blood tests. And the vet was expecting to say to me, look, organs are about to shut down like you would normally have with a 16-year-old dog.
Sure.
And he came back to me shaking in his head, and he said, he's got the organs of an 8-year-old. I do not understand it. And I couldn't tell him at the time that I was using the oil on the dog, because it wasn't at all accepted.
Right.
But the next vet I spoke to, I told, and she said, yep, she goes, I'd use it in a heartbeat.
And what was the
And she said,
determination point they used to be able to tell the organs were a lot younger than they were chronologically? How did they test that? How did they know that?
They did all blood tests. Yeah, they did all blood tests, and they said that with the levels, they get certain levels when the dogs get older,
Yeah.
and they can tell that the organs are getting to the point where they're starting to shut down and they're not working as effectively. But they said his organs were working like an 8-year-old. That they were just still so healthy, and
Oh
basically
boy.
there was absolutely nothing wrong with any of his organs. They said they just could not believe it. So yeah, it was just astounding. So
That's incredible.
yeah.
Well, I support Jenny Hallam, and you should too, listeners, because hashtag I support Jenny Hallam. Let me spell that. Hashtag I, the letter I, and then SUPPORT. Jenny is JENNY. Hallam is HALLAM. I support Jenny Hallam. You should support her, not just because she's going to help you figure out how to mend your dog or your cat or almost any biological kind of, person or not a person, but an animal. If you had a chimpanzee, or I'll bet you if you could get it into your sick goldfish, you probably turn that around.
Mhm.
That'd be a bit hard to
Well, we
tell.
have this. We have this saying that everything with a spine has an endocannabinoid system. So unfortunately, that means there are some politicians that don't.
There you go. Yeah, well, no wonder they preach so hard against it. So, okay, so you start to realize, wow, this stuff is working on me. It's working on animals. And how far back in time are we now when you're at this realization? How many years ago?
So this was 2015 when I realised it was really going well,
Wow.
and I started to reach out to a few other people that I didn't know personally, and so there were a couple of people that I'd seen on Facebook that were suffering quite a lot, and one was a kid called Ben Oakley, and he had something called stiff person syndrome, which
Stiff.
caused these horrific spasms, which were like the same, that looked the same as a seizure, but unfortunately they were conscious during it, so it was like having a taser held to your spine, and they could go up to 2 hours at a time. And so I saw him having a video of him having one of those spasms, and I actually started crying because I had had those spasms when I was younger, when I'd first had my pain condition. So I knew what they were like, and they were absolutely horrendous. And basically, nothing was helping this kid. He was only like 20 years old, and he'd gone from being an athlete sort of condition to basically in a wheelchair. And I was just heartbroken and I couldn't believe it. So I contacted his father and I said, look, I'm not sure if it will help or not, but I've got this oil and it's helping a lot of other people with autoimmune diseases, so it might help him. And so his father thought about it for a little bit. It took him a while before they decided to use it, but then eventually they did. And then after they did, it was literally the first dose had worked, and he straight away had gotten the pain relief from it that he hadn't been getting from anything else. And so it's basically stopped these spasms. So he was having them quite regularly.
Wow.
And since using the oil, it's been about 2 years. He's only had about 4 of these spasms in that time, and they've only lasted for a matter of like a minute or so each.
Well, here's what Ben
So,
Oakley has to say on Facebook about all of this. This was posted by Roll On Ben Oakley. Roll On Ben Oakley. It's on Facebook. It says it's a plea for support. Now, it's just a fresh post from December 2017, December 28. He says, they say, we cannot express how important this is. We need your help to ensure that we can muster as much support to keep the incredibly generous and compassionate. And I'm also going to say sharp as a tack. God, it's 5 a.m. for you. Listen to how sharp she is, folks. This is not some stoner loser flopping around on the floor, doesn't know what she's doing. Jenny Hallam needs to be kept free from being convicted over an outdated and completely and utterly ludicrous law. And, you know, the people pushing this law are the same people thinking it doesn't do medically wonderful things. And, of course, they're ignoring the face of evidence. It says here, if there was any other situation, our Jenny would be considered a hero. And she is to us. Jenny has not only saved my life, says this Ben Oakley. She's not only saved my life, she has given me and so many others the opportunity to flourish and live again. So, Jenny, tell us why, with this kind of endorsement, with these animals doing better, with your friends and other folks that you were rubbing on with pain creams, you've found this has been a fantastic thing for your own personal health. You've been able to get off just about every single pharmaceutical you've been on other than using this oil. Tell us why you're maybe going to go to jail.
I suppose you'd have to ask the government that. And there's a lot of people asking that same question here in Australia. We were told that it was legalised medicinally. Cannabis was legalised in November 2016. But unfortunately, people still can't get access to it. So even though it has been legalised since that amount of time, only 300 or less than 300 people in Australia actually have managed to get a prescription for it. So now, as everybody knows, there are a lot more than 300 people that want to access it. In fact, there are hundreds of thousands of people that want to access it. So this is a huge problem. And basically, we're told from the government that all we need to do is go and speak to our doctors and that they can prescribe it for us. But when we go and speak to our doctors, they say to us they don't know anything about it. They don't know anything about cannabis. They don't know anything about the endocannabinoid system. And they certainly don't know anything about a product and where to get it from. So we're very disappointed in our government. We think that if they're going to say that medicinal cannabis is legal, then the first thing they should have done was rolled out education programs for the doctors so that they knew what was going on and that they knew, at least what an endocannabinoid system was.
Yeah.
And that hasn't happened. So we know that they're not really too serious. So we know there's a fair bit of corruption going on, and that's why almost 2 years now or a year and a half now after they announced it was legal, we still don't have access to it. So unfortunately, because of that, people had to resort to turning to the black market and using oil from producers like myself, and that put us in a bit of trouble because the police then come and raid us and want to send us to jail. So at the moment, I'm facing charges of 9 years.
9 years.
So it's 9 years. It's 7 years for manufacturing cannabis oil. That's a major indictable offence. So that's 7 years just for that one. And there's another 2 years for the supply and possession. So together, the two of them is 9 years, and that's considered a life sentence here in Australia. So basically, how we see it is they want to give me a life sentence for saving lives. So we don't really understand why they're doing that, especially considering when they raided me, they didn't charge me straight away. It took them about 3 months before they actually laid charges. So in that time, they had enough enough time to find out that I hadn't been charging for it, that I had helped lots of different people, and that it had been extremely effective for these people. And for some of them, including quite a few children, it was the only thing keeping them alive at the time. And that to stop, for me to stop, would mean that these children would die. So they knew all of this, and they still went ahead and pressed charges. So it wasn't like I'd been charging, exorbitant amounts of money for it and had made, a profit off of all these people, and had been living large on it.
Sure.
Basically, I had actually spent, I had saved up a house deposit to finally buy a house, and I spent that on it. And when I got to about $20,000 that I'd spent, I couldn't face it anymore, so I just stopped counting, and I just put all the receipts in a bag, and just thought, if I ever get arrested, I'll just give these to the police. So I've spent a great deal of money on it, and so I just sort of can't understand why they would want to keep continuing charges when, really, I was doing it for, even though legally it might have been wrong, morally, it was the right thing to do. These people were
Yeah.
told they had no other option, that they were going to die without this medication. So, I was literally just keeping them alive until a legal product was available.
Well, let me ask you this. This is incredible what you've done so far. You're just moving forward with the truth and you're helping people out.
Hmm.
Now you've got this spiderweb bureaucracy of nonsense in a country that's legalizing it anyway. A couple of
Hmm.
questions for you. What do you say to people? Because I come across this all the time. A lot of us, the activists who may or may not have been in a medical situation but understand the truth. What do you say personally to anyone that says, "Well, that's the law. You have to obey the law"? What's your 1 minute answer to that kind of claim?
Well, we only get one life. So if you're told that there's nothing else you can do and cannabis is the only thing that will keep you alive, then I think it's a little bit silly to say that you'll just obey the law. To be quite honest, and we have a saying here, and I think it's been said all over the world, I would rather be illegally alive than legally dead.
Yeah,
And that's what we tell people. You only get one life. We don't get, several opportunities to come back like politicians and their political careers. So if we only get one life, we can't be mucking around with it. So if cannabis is the only thing that's going to save us, then as far as I'm concerned, stuff the law. Laws don't
right.
matter when it comes to saving a life.
Yeah, absolutely true. And let's not forget, I think you're good people, and good people disobey bad laws. And if a law is
Hmm.
bad and wrong, if I obeyed everything I was supposed to obey, I would also be in the ground right now. And that's not
Exactly.
anecdotal. That's my story. And then there are hundreds of thousands of similar stories like this that all of us anecdotal people are not getting together at secret conferences at Davos to riddle the world with
Mm.
these stories where we're colluding to try to prove some fallacy. This is an
Well, I mean,
individual
we've
story.
got medical evidence to back everything up. So we've got, doctors' reports and everything to back up what we're saying. So, when it comes to going to court, we're going to have that evidence. We're going to show what it's done for people. So, they can't keep denying it. They can try, but eventually, they're going to have to admit the truth.
Yeah, so you feel pretty confident. Now, what stage of legality? You've been to court. Where are you at legally in the process? You've been you have to go back to court soon, and you will have a trial, or where are we at with this?
Yep. Yep. Well, I've only just answered the charge. It's been adjourned quite a few times. So I've only just been able to manage to answer the charge in the lower court. So now we're moving up to the district court next. And I'll answer the charge again there on March the 2nd. And then from there, I'll be given a trial date, which will probably be towards the end of this year. And the trial could
Wow.
go from anything between a year and a half to 2 years. But there are hopes. There has been a push for the charges to be dropped, but that it's against the public interest and a waste of taxpayers' money. So there has been a push to do that, and an application has been put into the prosecution to have the charges dropped. So if that happens, that will probably happen at the next hearing. So, and also we have an election coming up just a couple of weeks afterwards. So there is a little bit of of
Wow.
talk that there's a possibility that those charges could be dropped. But either way, if they get dropped, that's great. If not, then we take it through the courts. We get a jury to decide whether or not I did the right thing, and so then we get to bring out all that medical evidence. So either way, we win.
Well, that's going to be great because I think by the time, I mean, not great that you're going to get, this kind of threat, but I think by the time you need to actually address this in court, there's only more medical evidence coming out every day. Your big problem is going to be collating it all and deciding which are the most salient and powerful pieces of medical evidence you can have to put your side of the
That's right.
story across. So
That's right.
you've already got a lot of stuff. Do you share a lot of these your medical awarenesses and revelations? These the data that you
Oh,
have?
definitely.
Where
Yeah,
ca
definitely. I teach other people how to make it because I can't help everybody now.
No.
I teach people how to make it. So I have my recipes online and I share those with people, and I give people advice on dosing and the different conditions. And so I do as much as I can now to teach other people how to make it themselves. And one of the things that I try to tell people is how easy it is to make it, because that's one of the things that's the biggest misconception about cannabis oil in general is people seem to think that it's difficult to make.
Yeah.
And this is one of the things that I'm trying to teach people is especially the coconut oil is one of the most simple things to make. It's just the same as making a soup on your kitchen bench. It could be just done in a slow cooker, 24 hours, and it's just so simple and it can literally save people's lives. So that's what I do now is I try and teach as many people how to make it themselves, as well as going around trying to educate people and also talk to politicians about getting this through.
Well,
So
where's
yeah,
that
we do the best.
website? Where's that website we can find these things?
Well, it's my Facebook page is Medicinal Cannabis for Australians.
Okay.
And that's my Facebook page, or you can get me on Facebook with just Jenny Hallam on there. So and it's an open page, so everybody can see what I'm doing on there. And so we just sort of share information and just teach as many people as we can. So yeah, it's just a matter of constantly educating the public, I think. So that's the
Yeah.
most important thing that we find at the moment.
What a great point. I remember when I was starting to learn how to make the Rick Simpson oil. That's the specific blend that I use to get my things turned around.
Hmm.
I was afraid. I was not sure how this was going to go. How flammable might it be? What kinds of problems? And I
Mm.
put it off. I had everything ready to go one day, and I just couldn't muster up the courage. And then the next day, I said, "Listen, you got to do this thing," and I made it happen. But it is far more easy than anyone can imagine. It just sounds like it's going to be difficult. It sounds partially because it's illegal, partially because we're not all chemists.
Hmm.
A lot of different
Yep.
reasons, but it's very simple. But can you take us through briefly? Because everyone almost that I know has a slow cooker. So what
Hmm.
kind? What tell us about how? Just take us through the simple process as you describe it, and just tell everybody listening
Okay.
right now that wants to listen to you. They're not going to research it; they'll research it later. But what do you do with your slow cooker and your coconut oil, and how much cannabis, and how does it go?
Okay. Okay. Well, what I do is a lot of people decarb their cannabis in the oven first, and I don't do that. When you do that, you're converting it all to THC, and I want to keep some of the THCA in mine. So what I usually do is I just take 1 ounce of cannabis to 1 litre of coconut oil, and I just put that in a slow cooker. I just mix it together. I leave it for 24 hours, and then I strain it and take out the solids, and then you put it in the fridge and it's ready to go. That's it. That's
Wow.
as easy
How
as it
easy
is.
is that? Now,
So,
slow cookers generally have two temperatures, high and low. So would you put that on the
yep.
high speed, high
No, we want
temperature?
it on the low. We want it on the low setting, and
Okay.
that way you're not decarbing all of it. You're keeping a lot of your THCA in it, and you're not decarbing it all and changing it all to the THC.
So once
Now,
again, that's an
another
ounce
tip.
of cannabis, and how
Yep,
much coconut oil
and
again?
1 litre of coconut oil.
1 liter. Okay.
And yep, and then another hint for people, because we know that there's all these different cannabinoids, and we, everyone always sort of concentrates on the CBDs and the THCs. Well, there's another really good one, and that's the CBN, and we're getting a lot of medical benefits out of the CBN. And normally would only normally pull about 1% CBN out of your oil, but a simple tip is if you can age your cannabis by like to 6 months and let it really dry out so that it crumbles in your hand when you touch it, you'll draw out much higher levels of CBN, and so
Oh,
you'll get better healing benefits out of your oil. So if you can age it, see a lot of people will cure it and they're leaving a bit of moisture in it, and that's sort of basically sort of stuffing you up. You're not getting as high levels out of it. So
oh.
if you let it age and dry a little bit, that helps. And the other thing I suggest as well is if you're making oil of any sort, whether it be coconut oil or the Rick's, because I do this Rick Simpson method as well.
Right.
We just don't call it Rick Simpson oil because we know he doesn't like it to be called that unless it's
Right.
him making it.
Understood.
So we
Yeah.
call it we
Sure.
call it FECO or fall extract oil, but I use the same process. But we found that if you use just one type of cannabis for it, then you're limiting yourself with the cannabinoids. So if you mix together at least two or three, I use up to 7 different types of cannabis in each batch. You're getting much better mix of the cannabinoid profile and terpene and flavonoid profile than you would get if you were used to use one strain alone. So if you can't pick, especially at the moment in Australia, we it's very hard to be able to get individual strains for individual conditions. So if you're trying to just trying to fix a condition and you can't get a particular strain, or if in my case you're trying to help many different conditions, so you need to get a mix of different things, then if you mix a few different strains together,
Sure.
then you get a much better oil as well.
Simple, effective, easy to do. Easy to do, and it
Easy.
makes completely good sense. So now that I have this liter of this cannabis that I've cooked in the slow cooker for, what did you say, 24 hours?
Mhm.
24 hours. So now I have this
Yep.
sludge, and I need to strain out the plant matter and just be dealing with the oil at
Yep.
that point, right? And then how do
Well,
I dose that?
well,
Like, what do I need, a tablespoon of that, or what do I do with that? The final
okay.
product.
Well, first we'll go back. The sludge that you get left behind, the actual the cannabis that's left behind,
Sure.
you can actually still use that. You don't have to throw that away.
Oh,
It's just it tastes horrible, but you can put that in the empty capsules, and you can still use that. And a lot of people just throw that away, thinking that it's no good, but it's actually stronger than the oil itself because you still have the plant matter in it there as well.
right.
It just you just can't. If you were using it as an oil, you don't want to chew. You don't want to be chewing
Yeah.
it. So, but if you put it in capsules, you can still use it, and so you're not wasting that either. So don't throw it away. Put it in capsules and use that as well. But with the actual oil, yeah, you keep that in. It's got to be stored in the fridge, and it lasts for 3 months. And how I usually dose it is I usually start people on children. I would give a quarter of a teaspoon, and adults I would start on half a teaspoon. And then basically what you do is, because every person is different, because it goes by not only just body weight, but also by the way people metabolize. So if they're a fast metabolizer, they'll use a lot more than if they're slow. So basically what you need to do then is every person has to adjust it personally, and they just increase it. And usually you can increase it about every 3 days, you can increase the dose. And so you basically just slowly increase the dose until you get to the level where it's working for you.
That's amazing. So that's simple and easy, folks. You have a crock pot, you've got a slow cooker, you can do this. You can get this stuff
Hmm.
into you. You know, were I to recommend that to people individually,
That's right.
which I don't do. So that's incredible. So who else is involved specifically in your fight right now? You can't be doing all of this by yourself. You have a lawyer, or how does it go?
Um, yeah, I've got a legal team at the moment. So I've got a solicitor who does a lot of the grunt work, and I've got two barristers, and one of them happens to work with Julian Assange. So I'm pretty lucky. He's a pretty
Mhm.
big human rights lawyer over here, so he's giving advice as well. So I'm really lucky with that. They're both of them are doing it pro bono for me, but unfortunately there's still a lot of costs that we have to cover with bringing experts over and those sort of things. So it's still going to be a big fight. But we're really lucky here. We've got some amazing people behind us, and we're getting more and more people. But that's what we really need is in America and in Canada, you were really lucky over there. A lot of high profile people came forward to support it, especially in America. One of the biggest things that changed people's opinions was when Jennifer Aniston stood up and supported it. And a lot of people that were real, goody two shoes that never had touched any sort of drug before looked at it and said, well, if Jennifer Aniston can support it, then it must be okay. And this is the sort of thing that we need to have happen here. We need more people to stand up and say that they agree with people using it and that they don't think it's a bad drug. And we've got to stop calling it a drug as well. That's the other thing that sort
Oh,
of
for
frustrates me. It's a
sure.
plant. It's a plant,
Absolutely. It is. It's a
and it's a
food.
life-saving plant. Yes,
It's
and it needs to be scheduled that way. And I think we need to go back to the UN and really fix it there. This needs to be. We need to just end prohibition worldwide. This whole thing where we're having to fight. Each country fighting individually to try and get it through. It's just ridiculous. This should be something that's just done worldwide, and they just say, right, okay, we were wrong about this. We shouldn't have prohibited it in the first place. We're just going to end prohibition on it, and okay, people just go for it. Do whatever you need to do. That would really help. And that would save millions and millions of people's lives. But unfortunately, this isn't the perfect world, and that's probably not going to happen.
right. Have you noticed, I don't know what they do in Australia, the way they do it here, and the way they do it a lot in the United States of America, and I guess other places too, but I'm most familiar with those two regions, is that they constantly go on and on about the costs of enforcement. Oh, this is going to be terrible. We're going to have to, we're going to be pulling over drivers and there's going to be going to jail. This is going to cost a lot of money, you bad people that want to smoke this thing and take this thing. And now we're finally conceding enough. But boy, oh boy, you're causing us such a problem with your ingestion habit. And it's no good for us. We're going to have to spend so much money. And while they're having that side of the argument, they don't discuss the effect of what it's going to be doing to the medical systems of these countries. It's going to be drastically eliminating series of illnesses in so many people. You're not going to have seizures. You're not going to have nutritional deficiencies. You're not going to have spiraling towards cancer all the time because you will have been taking
Well, we just look at
medicine.
That's right. Well, we just look at one of the just one little girl that I've been helping. Her name's Caitlin Mosley, and she's on Facebook as well. She's an activist. She's fighting for it. Her mother Katrina has been fighting for it, and she was having to give her daughter CPR on regular occasions, and having ambulances called out, and hospital stays, and ever since using the cannabis oil, she basically, I think she's only had the ambulance called out once or twice, and she's only had a couple of hospital stays. So that has saved already the government thousands hundreds of thousands of dollars in medical costs for just one child alone. So, can you imagine what would happen if everybody in the country was using it? It would just, the relief of their health system would just be huge. And we keep showing them the information from Colorado and places like that where it's come through, and we've already got, the evidence to show that this is the effect that it's had, and it hasn't had any bad reactions. There hasn't been any, bad reactions to it. In fact, everything has been really good. Crime rates have dropped. The illicit drug use has dropped. Opiate use has dropped. Deaths on the road have dropped. All of those things have been positive things. And this is what we're trying to show our government, that the sky hasn't fallen in now that we've seen it legalized in other countries. So there's, no problem in doing it here. But we think that the biggest problem is that the government and specifically the pharmaceutical companies have seen the amount of money that they've lost in the countries where it has been, and the states in America where it has been legalized, and they don't want that to happen here. So they're trying to hold on and stop it being as freely accessible as it has been in some of those other countries. So I think that's why here in Australia they're trying to stop the dispensary model so that we can't have access to dispensaries like you have in other places. And basically they just want us to have a pharmaceutical product that's only prescribed through doctors and dispensed through, we call them a chemist or a pharmacist. So they're really trying to control the way people access it. But people want to be able to have whole plant cannabis. They want to be able to vape it if they want, or smoke it, or ingest it raw. So people don't want to be told how to use it. They just want to be able to given access to it so they can use it however they want to use it.
And isn't it funny though that while you're 100% correct about this, the underlying factor in all of this is that most people want to be doing this. A lot of people are learning how to do it, and I hope a few people have gone from not knowing anything today to learning how to do a lot of great things they can help themselves with. But where is this demand and insistence all the time politically from your government, my government, the UK government, the United States, this preaching about how wonderful democracy is and the will of the people and the majority, and we're trying to help everyone. And then meanwhile, it's this sliver of idiots that are keeping it from the rest of us while they pretend to promote, we have to go and kill a bunch of people in the Middle East to promote democracy.
Exactly.
It's like, why don't you promote it at home by accepting the facts, put your beliefs on a shelf, and just let us get at this plant? Because when I go home and have a little basil and tomato pesto salad tonight, I'm going to be using plants as well without any kind of trouble or oversight from anybody else. It's the same thing. Where is that? Who's calling them out on this other than ourselves and a few other people? It's a key issue.
It is. And what frustrates me is governments are always going on about how they're trying to make the people safer, and they're doing different things to make the people safer. They want the roads safer. They want this because they want to save lives. Well, if they want to save lives, they could save hundreds of thousands of lives immediately by making cannabis accessible. And here in Australia, there have been polls done that say 97% of the population want medicinal cannabis available immediately. And not only that, 93% of the population want recreational cannabis available immediately. So that has to tell you, when the people are calling calling for this, but the government is still ignoring us. There is obviously some sort of problem. There is corruption somewhere, and we have it here in Australia because our Prime Minister here in Australia, his wife owns shares in the pharmaceutical companies that have vested interests in this. So this is why we're having problems here, because there's corruption that goes very high up, very, very high up to the top level. And so this is why it has happened the way it has. He instructed the health minister, the federal health minister, instead of having the laws to access it done federally, so that would be done immediately and would basically be done easily. What they did instead was they put it down into the hands of the states, and they said, okay, the states now have to organise access and figure it out. And so it caused chaos. None of the states knew what to do. Nobody wanted to be the first one to do it, because they didn't want to do it wrong. They wanted to sit back and wait for somebody else to do it first so that they could fix all the problems that they had.
Right.
So that's what's caused the problems here, and that was done deliberately. It all could have been changed. It all could have been done on a different model, and we would have access now. But unfortunately, there is just too much manipulation. There's too much corruption, and this has to change. When our Prime Minister is bringing in laws and manipulating the system so that his own family is financially benefiting, that's when we have to start asking some questions and saying, is it acceptable that to make a little bit more money, he's allowing, so many people to die? So many people are dying. And just myself, from the people that I've been helping, at least 50 people that I was helping have died, in the time that I've been doing this. So, and in the time since my raid, there's probably been about 15 to 20. So, and some of those have been children. So, I'm really angry. I'm really, really angry that they have promised this, that they've dangled this carrot in front of people, but now they're just pulling it away every time, they're reaching for it. So
Right.
This is just torture. It's just torture to the people that are the sickest and those that are dying, because they know that they don't have the time to wait around for a legal product, and the government is just putting this off time and time again.
Well, Jenny, I'm sure glad I'm on the same side of the ledger about all of this as you are, because I'd hate to take you on in an argument. You're a
Thank you.
clear-headed woman who's got a lot of experience behind you and what you've been doing. You've seen it in animals. You've seen it in young children. You've seen it flatten people suffering from spasms and convulsions. You've seen people get up and walk around from wheelchairs. You've got people in wheelchairs telling folks how great you are and what's been going on. You weren't profiting from selling this stuff to people, and it's just completely untenable. I don't know what to do to fully rally people's awareness to go, look, this is completely backwards, and taking it for one more second, whether it's a law or not, we're done with this. I'm just trying to find out. Like, it's the same thing as Occupy. Remember the Occupy movement? And they were in New York, and they were saying, like, it's the 1% and the 99% are rallying against this. Well, is it the same thing now too? Is it the bankers in this one as well? Like, how do they manage to maintain such a hold on the control when we're all done with cries of anecdotal? I mean, this is all said and done. So, I mean,
Yeah. Well, basically, like I said, it's the only people that are holding this back are the ones that have got financial, interest in this. It's the pharmaceutical companies. And unfortunately, like I said, when our own heads of government have vested interest in those, pharmaceutical companies, that's a huge problem for us. That is a huge problem for us. And unfortunately, the mainstream media isn't talking about that here in Australia.
No.
They're not mentioning it. And there's a thing that as well. I don't want to get into the whole no-vax, the no-vax sort of issue, but the same Prime Minister brought in a law that if you didn't vaccinate your children, you wouldn't be able to access the social services money. So basically, it's called no vax, no pay here in Australia. And that same Prime Minister, his wife owns the company that makes those vaccinations. So he brought in a law that basically, benefited his own wife's company. So this is the sort of conflict of interest that is happening here. And the same woman, his wife, also just the company that she owns, has shares in, also released a new cancer drug that they're using now in Australia. So now, if we were to use medicinal cannabis, people won't be needing her cancer drug either.
Right.
So, these are sort of things. Now, she also has shares in the company that makes Epidiolex. Now, Epidiolex, we know, is just basically a CBD dominant version, and it isn't really effective. We know that it's already been proven that it's only 10% effective in epilepsy. Yet that's the drug that they're using using for the epilepsy trials here.
Yeah.
Now, it's failing already. Now, we knew that it would fail because they've already said it's only 10% effective. So why not use a product that we know is at least 80% effective? Why use that product? Well, we know why. It's because it's her company that makes that one. So they've just signed a contract for using Epidiolex in one of the states in Australia here for 7 years. So, like I said, there is massive, conflict of interest, and this needs to be addressed. And while these people are making more and more money, Australians are dying. And this is what we need to stand up and say that this is enough. Enough is enough. And we're going to stand up and say we're not going to put up with this anymore. And we've got elections coming up, and people need to start voting smart. They have to be intelligent with where they're putting their votes. They have to really look into the different parties and what their policies are on cannabis, and really think about what they're doing, because we had our last federal election and people just voted for whoever they thought was a friend of theirs, or or just happened to know. And it split the cannabis vote in the community. And rather than getting somebody in, we didn't get anybody in. So, this time we have to be smart, and we want people to think about what they're doing before they, write anything down on that ballot paper.
Well, you're absolutely right. Jenny Hallam, it's been so great speaking with you. Now, we do have a couple of places where you're going to need to go, folks, to keep following Jenny and her saga. Now, I'm going to have you back on the show if you'll have us. And it'll probably happen before you go back to court, but we will have heard so many other wonderful things at that point. Is that okay?
That would be lovely.
We'll get you back on in a few months or so. We're blazing some new trails, getting a lot of people like yourself on, but we will want to come back to you.
Yep, that would be lovely. I'd be happy to come back again.
So we can find you. Like I said before, there's this page on Facebook. It's called ISupportJennyHallam.com. # Hands Off Our Healers. We support Jenny Hallam. So if you want to support Jenny and you want to understand what she's going through politically, legally, and most importantly, biologically, do get over there to Facebook. And she's also available at Support Jenny Hallam. That's another support team of Jenny's. And, of course, Jenny is on Facebook as Jenny Hallam. Last name is Hands. Is that your original
That was
surname?
my maiden name. Yes, it was.
Your maiden name. So that's in Hanns. And Jenny is absolutely, as you can hear, a very clear-spoken. This is the joke I hear. Everybody tries to chip away
Oh,
at this.
I know.
They make us all sound like Cheech and Chong. And no offense, I'm trying to get Tommy on the show. But not everybody's
no.
a vacuous stoner, and they were only playing those roles anyway. So
Exactly, and that's what people need to realise, that there's good, intelligent people that are cannabis users, and we're not all lazy stoners. So
Yeah.
it's time. It's time we get rid of that stigma.
It is definitely time to get rid of that stigma, and it's definitely time to get yourself at least a secondhand slow cooker, it sounds like, and an access to some good coconut oil.
That's right.
to go with the cannabis. So, Jenny, we're going to let you go. We got some more things to do on the show before we leave, but I'm really happy to have met you on the phone, on the Skype, and we'll definitely have you back. And hold it together. There are people in the world that want to help you, and the more focus we can bring into people in a similar plight, the sooner you're going to be out of trouble,
Thank you very much. Well, thank you for your time. I do appreciate it. But, we just want people to know that it's time to stand up and stop being scared to admit that you're a cannabis user or that you support cannabis. You're not a bad person for doing that. And, while people are scared, to stand up and admit it, that's why we're in the position we are. So stop being so scared. Stand up for cannabis today, and admit that, you're a good, decent person.
That's it. Well, couldn't have said it better myself. Thank you so much for coming on. Jenny Hallam, we will definitely speak with you again. Good luck. Thank you very much.
Thank you for your time.
You're
Have
welcome.
a lovely day.
So that's Jenny. She is another powerhouse, and I'll bet there are at least one or two women like her in every single country that all of this stuff has anything to do with.